Insane red card. Goalkeepers getting injured in the middle of the match. Unexpected fights. FIFA staff making bizarre mistakes. Cracks, welcome back, because today we have to break down one of the most surreal, chaotic, and unbelievable matches we've seen in this World Cup so far, Paraguay against Turkey. A game that had absolutely everything. Drama from the opening seconds, controversy before halftime, frustration, tears, injuries, fights, and one of the strangest endings you will ever see on a football pitch. And the craziest part of all? This was not just another group stage match, this was practically a final for both teams. Whoever lost was almost certainly going home. The pressure was enormous, the tension was obvious from the very beginning, and what happened over the next 90 minutes was something nobody could have predicted. So stay until the end because we're going through every insane moment that left this match marked as one of the wildest of the tournament. First of all, we need to understand the context, because without that, it's impossible to grasp just how explosive this game really was. Both Paraguay and Turkey came into this match after losing their opening game of the tournament. In other words, this was a do-or-die situation. Another defeat for either side would leave them on the edge of elimination, maybe even officially out depending on other results. There was no room for mistakes, no room for fear, and definitely no room for losing concentration. Every tackle, every pass, every shot carried the weight of an entire nation. Paraguay knew they had to respond after a painful start. Turkey knew the exact same thing. Both teams walked onto that field fully aware that their World Cup could end right there. And when you combine desperation, pressure, and emotion at this level, you already know something unforgettable can happen. What nobody imagined was that the match would descend into complete madness almost from the very first whistle. Even before kickoff, there were signs that this was not going to be a normal game. The cameras focused on Paraguay's players standing in a circle, listening closely to their captain, Gustavo Gomez. And you could see it in their faces, they were locked in. Gomez was speaking with the intensity of a man who knew the next 90 minutes could define their entire tournament. He wasn't just giving a routine captain's talk, he was trying to ignite something inside his teammates, trying to make them understand that this was the kind of match where you either become heroes or you leave with regrets that follow you forever. Every player was listening. No one looked distracted. No one looked relaxed. It was the face of a team preparing for battle. On the other side, Turkey also looked tense, serious, determined. And that atmosphere of urgency, of desperation, of fear mixed with hope, set the perfect stage for the chaos that was about to begin. Because in the very first minute, before Turkey could even settle into the game, before many fans had even taken their seats, Paraguay struck with one of the most shocking goals of the tournament. Matias Galarza received the ball, looked up, and instead of playing it safe, instead of trying to build patiently, he made a decision that changed the entire night. From roughly 20 meters out, he unleashed a violent long-range shot that flew past the goalkeeper and into the net. It was an absolute rocket. The Turkish players were still trying to organize themselves on the pitch, still trying to understand Paraguay's shape, and suddenly they were already behind. The goalkeeper had no chance. The strike was too quick, too clean, too powerful. And just like that, in a matter of seconds, Paraguay had the lead. The stadium erupted. Paraguay's players celebrated like they had scored the winning goal in a final, and honestly, given the importance of the match, you can understand why. They knew how massive that moment was. It wasn't just an early lead. It was a psychological blow to Turkey and a massive injection of belief for Paraguay. And on top of that, it became an immediate record. According to the official timing, Galarza scored after just 65 seconds, making it the earliest goal of this World Cup, surpassing the previous one scored by Morocco the day before at 1 minute and 22 seconds. So in barely over a minute, Paraguay had already made history and completely changed the direction of the match. But if you thought that was the craziest thing Galarza would do in the opening minutes, think again. Because only a few minutes later, in another bizarre twist, the same Matias Galarza received a yellow card. And that created a truly absurd record. As Mr. Chip pointed out, Galarza became the first player in the history of the World Cup to score a goal and receive a yellow card within the first 4 minutes of a match. Goal at 65 seconds, yellow card at 3 minutes and 26 seconds. It sounds almost made up, but that's exactly the kind of night this turned out to be. In the span of barely 3.5 minutes, Galarza had already gone from hero to record breaker to caution-booked chaos magnet. It was the perfect symbol of a game that simply refused to behave like a normal football match. After that disastrous start, Turkey had no choice but to react. And to their credit, they did not collapse immediately. They started pushing forward with urgency, trying to recover from the shock of conceding so early. Their midfield began to move the ball quicker, their fullbacks pushed higher, and they tried to trap Paraguay deep inside their own half. There was a sense of desperation in every Turkish attack, but also determination. They knew the worst thing they could do was panic. Still, the pressure of the moment was obvious. Every time a Turkish player miscontrolled the ball or missed a pass, you could see the frustration building. Paraguay, meanwhile, understood that the game had changed in their favor. With the lead in hand, they could stay compact, defend aggressively, and wait for moments to counter. The match became a battle between Turkey's urgency and Paraguay's resistance, and that tension kept rising minute after minute. Then came the moment that changed everything and turned the match from intense into completely scandalous. Before halftime, Miguel Almiron made a decision that no one watching could believe. During a confrontation with a Turkish opponent, Almiron approached him and covered his mouth with his hand while speaking directly toward him. It was one of those gestures that instantly creates suspicion because when a player deliberately hides his mouth while saying something to an opponent, everyone knows it's not because he's offering compliments. The Turkish player immediately reacted and informed the referee. At first, the referee did not seem to understand the seriousness of what had happened. Play continued for a moment, and many people in the stadium probably thought it would be forgotten. But this is the modern World Cup. Cameras catch everything, and VR misses very little. Soon enough, the video assistant referees called the referee over to review the incident. And that's when the tension inside the stadium completely changed. Replays showed Almiron covering his mouth while speaking to the Turkish player, and suddenly everyone knew that this could end very badly for Paraguay. In recent times, FIFA has taken an extremely hard stance on conduct involving offensive language, discriminatory comments, or gestures intended to hide communication with an opponent. The so-called anti-discrimination protocols and disciplinary interpretations have made these situations much more serious than they used to be. Once the referee went to the screen, there was a feeling that the decision was almost inevitable. And it was. After reviewing the footage, the referee came back furious and showed Almiron a straight red card. Paraguay's player could not believe it. His face said everything. Shock, anger, disbelief, regret. He stood there staring as if hoping the referee might change his mind, but there was no going back. In one moment of recklessness, in one decision to confront a rival in a way that could never look good on camera, Almiron had left Paraguay with 10 men in one of the most important matches of the tournament. The Paraguayan bench was stunned. Gustavo Alfaro looked like he could not process what had just happened. The players surrounded the referee, trying to argue, trying to understand, but the damage was already done. Paraguay had gone from dreaming of a controlled victory to facing almost an entire half with one man less. And as if the red card itself wasn't enough, the decision sparked an immediate explosion on the touchline. Turkish players and members of the staff rushed toward the Paraguayan technical area, furious about the incident, furious about whatever had been said, furious about the emotions boiling over. For a few seconds it felt like the whole match might descend into a full-blown brawl. There was pushing, shouting, players grabbing each other, coaches stepping in, substitutes trying to separate bodies while others seemed ready to make things even worse. It was one of those scenes where the ball becomes completely irrelevant because everyone is focused on the confrontation. The referee and his assistants had to work hard just to restore order. The benches were on edge, the crowd was roaring, and the match had now crossed the line from tense into outright hostile. When the first half finally ended, the feeling around the stadium was simple. There was no way the second half could be calm. Turkey had almost an entire half to attack with an extra man. Paraguay had to survive wave after wave of pressure while protecting a one-goal lead. The emotional state of both teams was fragile. Turkey believed the game was there for the taking. Paraguay knew they were hanging on by a thread. And that is exactly why what happened after the break felt even more absurd. Early in the second half came one of the strangest injury moments you will ever see. Paraguay's goalkeeper went to take a goal kick, struck the ball with force, and immediately his body language changed. Something had gone wrong. His foot appeared to twist awkwardly during the follow-through, and right away he dropped to the ground asking for medical attention. Normally, in modern football, that's the kind of moment where play stops almost immediately. Goalkeepers are treated with extra caution, and when a player is down after a non-contact action, referees tend to be quick with the whistle. But not this time. In a moment that left everyone confused, the referee seemed to believe the goalkeeper was exaggerating or wasting time. Instead of stopping the match and calling the medical staff, he essentially told him to get up and continue. The goalkeeper was furious. He kept signaling that he was actually hurt, not acting, not trying to break the rhythm, but the referee didn't buy it. It was surreal. Fans in the stands, commentators, players on both sides, everyone looked confused. You could see the Paraguayan goalkeeper yelling in frustration, trying to explain that he genuinely needed treatment, and yet the match kept moving. It's incredibly rare to see a referee ignore a goalkeeper asking for medical attention in that kind of situation. Usually, officials do not want to take risks, especially in a World Cup match. But here, the referee's suspicion of time wasting overruled caution, and the result was one of the most bizarre scenes of the tournament. Paraguay's bench exploded in anger. Their players were protesting. And once again, the match slipped deeper into madness. Meanwhile, Turkey kept attacking. They were dominating possession, moving the ball from side to side, trying to stretch Paraguay's defensive block and find the breakthrough. Every minute that passed increased the tension because despite having an extra player, despite spending so much time in the attacking half, Turkey still couldn't score. They crossed, they shot, they combined around the box, but Paraguay somehow kept resisting. Their defenders were throwing bodies in front of shots, making desperate clearances, fighting for every second. It was ugly at times, but it was heroic too. You could feel Turkey's frustration growing with each missed opportunity. The sense of panic started to creep in because this was exactly the kind of match where domination means nothing if you don't convert it into goals. One of the clearest signs of that frustration came in a painful moment for Turkey. They created a dangerous chance, sent the ball into the box, and one of their players rose to meet it with a header. For a split second, it looked like the equalizer had finally arrived. But instead, the ball went wide. And the reaction from the Turkish player told the whole story. He dropped to the ground and began crying, not just disappointment, but real tears of frustration. He knew how big that chance was. He knew chances like that do not come forever in matches of this magnitude. For several seconds he remained on the ground, devastated, unable to hide the emotional weight of the moment. And when he finally stood up, the sadness was still written all over his face. Turkey were staring elimination in the face, and their players could feel it. As the clock kept moving, the match became more physical, more desperate, and more chaotic. Turkey started forcing everything. They pushed Paraguayan players after duels, complained to the referee after nearly every decision, and tried every psychological trick possible to keep pressure on their opponents. There were moments where Turkish players gestured angrily toward the officials, moments where they tried to silence the crowd, moments where the entire team looked like it was playing with nerves instead of clarity. Paraguay, for their part, embraced the suffering. They defended deeper and deeper, wasting no energy on style, focusing only on survival. Every clearance was celebrated. Every foul won was precious. Every second burned felt like a small victory. It wasn't pretty, but it was exactly the kind of football a team has to play when reduced to 10 men and fighting for its life. And this is where the statistics make the story even crazier. Turkey ended up dominating the ball to an absurd degree. Their possession went above 70%. Their number of shots climbed beyond 30. Think about that for a second. More than 70% possession. More than 30 attempts. A full half, almost an hour really, with an extra man. And still no goal. According to the records highlighted after the game, no team in World Cup history had ever lost a match after having over 70% possession and more than 30 shots. Turkey managed to create that anti-record in one of the cruelest possible ways. And to make it even worse, this came after another game where they had also failed to score despite controlling long stretches. In other words, it wasn't just one bad night, it was a collapse of efficiency on the biggest stage imaginable. But even with all of that madness, the match still had time for one more bizarre scene. In the final minutes, Matías Galarza, the man who had scored the only goal of the game and set the tone from the opening minute, had to leave the pitch on a stretcher. Under normal circumstances, that would be a fairly standard moment. But somehow, even that turned into comedy. The FIFA assistants carrying him seemed confused about where they were supposed to go. They hesitated, looked around, and apparently didn't know which direction to take him. So the player himself, while lying there, had to point them toward the right exit. It was unbelievable. In a match already overflowing with strange moments, now even the stretcher exit had become part of the chaos. Galarza, exhausted and hurting, still had to direct the people carrying him off the field. You couldn't script it any better. By that stage, Turkey were throwing absolutely everything forward, but it still wasn't enough. Paraguay kept clearing the ball, kept fighting, kept surviving. And when the referee finally blew the final whistle, the contrast in emotions was brutal. For Paraguay, it was pure ecstasy. Their players celebrated those 3 points as if they had won a title. And honestly, given the circumstances, it must have felt that way. They had scored almost immediately, lost a player to a controversial red card, spent nearly an hour defending with 10 men, survived endless Turkish pressure, endured injuries, chaos, fights, and bizarre refereeing moments, and still somehow came out on top. It was one of those wins that can define a tournament run, one of those nights that bonds a squad forever. The players screamed, embraced, fell to the ground, and looked toward their fans as if sharing a miracle together. On the other side, Turkey were completely shattered. Several players collapsed where they stood. Others covered their faces. Some began crying immediately. And you could understand why. This wasn't just a defeat. It was the kind of defeat that stays with a team for years. They had the possession, the chances, the extra man, the momentum, and yet they still couldn't score a single goal. To be eliminated in that way, after controlling so much of the match and still ending with nothing, is emotionally devastating. You could see the disbelief on their faces. They knew the chance was there. They knew they let it slip away. Football can be cruel in many ways, but few are crueler than dominating a match and still watching your World Cup end at the final whistle. The Paraguayan fans, meanwhile, were living a dream. Every save, every tackle, every clearance in those final minutes had pushed them closer and closer to euphoria. And once the result was official, the stands exploded. There were chants, applause, tears, hugs, flags waving everywhere. It was a celebration of resilience more than beauty, a celebration of a team that refused to break even when the entire match turned against them. In moments like that, fans don't care how pretty the football was. They care about the heart their team showed. They care about the fight, the sacrifice, the willingness to suffer for the shirt. And Paraguay gave them exactly that. After the match, all eyes turned to Gustavo Alfaro in the press conference, and once again, he delivered comments that immediately grabbed attention. The Paraguayan coach spoke with a mix of relief, pride, and emotion, and his message was clear. This victory had been built on character. He even joked about Matthias Galarza, saying that if being depressed made him play like that, then maybe he should stay that way, because his performance had been extraordinary. But beyond the humor, Alfaro also made a serious point. He asked for criticism to be directed at him rather than the players. He defended his squad passionately and made it clear that this group had shown something special under pressure. Then came one of the most powerful parts of his press conference. Alfaro said that whenever Paraguay are considered finished, whenever everyone writes them off and assumes they are already dead, that is exactly when they become most dangerous. He spoke not only as Paraguay's coach but also with the admiration of someone who understands the country's football identity. He described how in the most difficult circumstances, when everything seems lost, Paraguayan players often find a way to rise, to compete, to suffer, and to deliver. And according to him, that is exactly what happened in this match. He said the players gave him one of the most beautiful nights of his professional coaching career, especially because it happened on a stage as big as the World Cup. Those words hit hard because when you watch the match back, you can see why he felt that way. It wasn't just about the 3 points. It was about the emotional size of the performance, and if we step back and look at the whole picture, this match had everything needed to become unforgettable. An opening goal after just 65 seconds. A yellow card to the same goal scorer moments later. A controversial red card after an incident with a covered mouth. A bench-clearing confrontation. A goalkeeper injury that the referee refused to take seriously. A Turkish player in tears after missing a huge chance. More than 70% possession for the losing team. More than 30 shots with no reward. A stretcher crew getting lost and needing directions from the player they were carrying. A team with 10 men surviving against all odds. Another team leaving the tournament in absolute disbelief. It was football at its most chaotic, emotional, irrational, and unforgettable. And maybe that's exactly why the World Cup remains so special. Because no matter how much tactics, data, and preparation matter, there are still nights like this where logic disappears and football becomes pure drama. A single shot in the first minute can decide everything. A single moment of indiscipline can transform a match. A team can dominate every number and still lose. A team can suffer almost every possible setback and still win. This Paraguay versus Turkey match was not a masterpiece of calm, beautiful football. It was something much messier than that. It was a war of nerves, a storm of emotion, and a reminder that in the World Cup, survival is sometimes worth more than style. So now the big question is what happens next. For Paraguay, this result doesn't just keep them alive. It could become the turning point of their entire campaign. These are the kinds of victories that can give a team enormous confidence. When you survive a night like this, you start believing that maybe you can survive anything. Maybe this is the match they look back on if they make a deep run. Maybe this is the moment that gave the squad the conviction to keep fighting. For Turkey, meanwhile, the questions are painful and unavoidable. How do you dominate so much and score nothing? How do you waste a numerical advantage for nearly an hour? How do you recover mentally from a defeat this brutal? Those are the questions they'll have to live with. But one thing is certain, cracks, this match is going to be talked about for a long time. Because it wasn't just a football game. It was a collection of unbelievable moments stitched together into one night of absolute madness. It had the kind of scenes that make fans jump off the couch, scream at the television, argue online, and replay highlights over and over again just to confirm that what they saw actually happened. And if the rest of the tournament gives us even half this level of chaos, then we are in for something truly unforgettable. Well, cracks, those are the biggest and most important details from Paraguay against Turkey, one of the most surreal matches we've seen in this World Cup so far. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more of the latest football drama, controversies, and all the craziest stories from the tournament, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video. Let me know in the comments, was this the wildest match of the World Cup up to now, or do you think we'll still see something even crazier? I'll be reading all of you. See you in the next video with more football news, more drama, and more unforgettable moments from the world of football.